What if we could change our foot positioning to bias our strong muscles and deactivate perhaps the not so strong muscles? This occurred to me today as I was warming up, doing my lunges and Cossacks and just kind of spending time on the ground, rolling around really. And it kind of occurred to me that if I stand up straight and I fully rotate my feet out, so I look like a duck, duck stance, and I start to bend over and I start to lean over, I feel my glutes more because the glutes function as a hip extensor, but also as a hip external rotator. So if you bend over and you externally rotate your feet, now you have a whole stack more glute fibers that are now being turned on. And so today, with that in mind, I just started kind of squatting with a little bit more external rotation. Obviously, I don't want to just jump into it straight away because the knees are kind of vulnerable when your feet are that externally rotated. Because if you can't maintain the knees out, then your knee valgus is simply easier to get into because you're so much more externally rotated. There's so much more room for the knees to go in than out. So I did that. And then that thought carried over into me going into rack pulls, and I started to bias external rotation there as well. And I felt a little bit more comfortable doing that because, there's no bounce at the bottom and I'm kind of in a very small range of motion. So the chance of knee valgus is very minimal. So I started doing that, and I felt like glutes that were working more, but I didn't feel all that much stronger. I was kind of biasing, and then by the time I got to 260 on the rack pull, it was basically back to one normal self, maybe just a little bit more external rotation. And then with all that in mind, I thought, the way I squat high bar, this kind of position is a little bit strange, but front squat is where I got a little bit wider and a little bit more externally rotated stance. So then after a whole stack of rack pulls, I was like exhausted in the lower back, but I thought I'd do a quick run up on front squats and feel how it is. And the feeling is that yes, the glutes are more stacked, but at the same time, because I'm externally rotating my feet, I'm also externally rotating my legs, and which means I have more space to sit in between my feet or my shoes, which kind of lent me into a more upright squat, which obviously is coupled with more quads. So it's a nice little discovery that I found. Even though I'm kind of scared for my knees now, the hips are feeling a lot more engaged and my quads are more engaged. But at the same time, I'm like, damn, this is funky for the knees. The knees felt well, but I don't have the how should I say it? The security. I don't have the confidence to really send it. So maybe for the next, foreseeable future, I'll just mess around with that as I'm warming up in my kind of daily squats. Just mess around with that, because if I can achieve more effortless upright posture, that's gonna be really good. And this is all kind of born out of the idea of, what can I do to bias a bit more strength of that rack pull mid shin. So I thought, it's really hip extension. All I got to do is stand up with it. Like there's no quads when you're starting at mid shin. So that kind of like spilled over to, how do I get more glutes involved? We just rotate your feet out. And then I started messing around with Cossack squats and all that, and I started feeling more glutes. And so that's kind of where it was born out of. So what if I just permanently a little bit more external rotation into the mix? Maybe that's going to delete some of that femur length that I have to battle with. For a long time, people were saying to me, go wider with the stance. Well, I might not have to go wider and go through that whole pain of learning, teaching my hips to do that. But externally rotating feels rather more natural for me and kind of makes me more in my quads, makes me more upright. So it's kind of like win-win. The only fear is the knees. So I'm going to try and kind of mess around with this, but with the rack pulls, it's like, okay, sink into your lats, brace as hard as you can, and then just squeeze the hell out of the glutes and hamstrings, and the thing should move. It's remarkable how much patience you have to have on a rack pull, because there's nothing, and then boom, the weight kind of separates from the pins and off you go. And then once you start, you're like, well, this isn't that heavy. But it's just that belief that eventually, after sinking all that energy into the bar, it will move. That's basically the same feeling that I have when I'm deadlifting off the floor. I don't have that pop. I just don't. Like, weights don't pop off the ground for me. It's a slow freaking grind to get it moving. And then once I get it moving, pretty much like 99% of the time, I will lock it out. Unless there's like a bad position that I get into or whatever. So, it's interesting. I can't grow smaller femurs. My growing is finished. I had no control over it anyway. But if I can change my positioning, my technique, and bias some more external rotation and kind of like, twofold, delete the length of the femur from the side if you're watching me, which is going to make me more upright. So it's kind of a nice little kind of workaround to do that. Now, I have tried this in the past, but I tried it for different reasons. I tried it for, simply just to stay more upright. It didn't come from, I just need more glutes. I've tried wide stance, kind of like really, really wide, like almost, sumo stance. I remember I did a whole stack of box squats, when I was heavily influenced by the West Side, Louis Simmons. My God, my brain stopped. I remember I did a stack of that, and that kind of felt funky on my knees. I remember I made a bunch of videos that my knees were kind of freaking hurting doing that. But this is not wide stance. This is same stance, except external rotations in the mix. So glutes. So lots more glutes, lots more quads, more upright. I imagine it's going to be easier for me, leverage-wise, physics-wise, to overcome some of these forces if I'm more upright. So the shoes are in the mix now. External rotations in the mix. I mean, I'm not sure if it's going to be in the mix permanently. I'm not sure if I'm quite there yet, but maybe it's going to be a nice little solution. And then the rack pulls. Man, geez, I would love to get the rack pulls moving a little bit. I still don't understand how my freaking mid-shin rack pull and off the floor is the same. I'm trying to process what the hell does that mean. I've spent so much time in the last few days thinking about that. Why am I like that? Does that mean that I'm bad off the floor or good off the floor? It's a real head scratcher to think about. Because my experience off the floor is, if I can get it moving, I'll finish it. Same thing with the freaking rack pull, man. If I can get that thing moving, it's moving. But it's different driving muscles at those two lengths. At the bottom, it's a bit more acute angles, right? But more quads, right? Like, there's some dorsiflexion available for you to use. So it's, that's one example or one scenario. And then at the top, there's no dorsiflexion at all. It's all posterior chain, yet I still can't get it moving. Bizarre, man. I don't know what that means. And, I remember, some of you guys said deficit pulls. I remember doing deficit pulls, and I worked up to like 240 for a set of 3, I think. I think I did 250 for one. I'm just trying to remember. So the deficit is weaker. So what does that mean? Deficit is weaker than the floor pull and the rack pull. So maybe that's the weak thing, if I think about it. Maybe that's what needs to be trained, because that's the weakest of the bunch. So I'm weak off the floor. Aha, now we're getting somewhere. So if you're explosive off the floor, then your deficit should be even better, right? Am I getting that right or wrong? So if I go and I deadlift 260 off the deficit, man, I'll have to go back and see what my deficits were, because this is going to be interesting, because I have now 3 levels, 3 exams, even though they're freaking years apart of doing this stuff, these blocks. But, let's say my best PI is 250 off the floor, 260 or 250 of the deficit, 265 off the floor, and then you have 260 of the rack pull. What is going on there? So 250 is the smallest number. So maybe that is what needs to be worked, right? If I just use the analogy that I've used so far in the last 3 months or so, 4 months, it was the case of whatever's weak, do that. So maybe the deficit's weak. Isn't that interesting? Why is the deficit weak? Core. The core is not stabilizing. Maybe I'm even more bent over, so more upper back. Or the obvious one is more quads. The quads are not strong. So maybe the hack squat and the deficits have something in common. There's a lot to process there, man. But, I'm a big fan of doing a whole stack of these different movements and then just trying to draw parallels between them and trying to put them into certain buckets. So let's put the hack squats and the deficits in the same thing, even though they're not, one's very freaking upright, the other one is very bent over. But what they share in common is the quads. The quads have to do something. Unless you want to freaking do a deficit pull, which is just 100% stiff-legged. Now, that's a completely different movement altogether. I'm guessing with the deficit pull, there is some dorsiflexion. You're biasing your knees forward and then, working around the knees to go from there. Because if you don't do that, if you maintain vertical shins, then at that point, it's just a freaking stiff-legged. It's an RDL. It's a stiff-legged deadlift. And that is completely different to a deficit pull, where you're trying to add speed into the bar before you even get to the floor level. I don't know. I've got mixed ideas about whether deficits are going to help me or not. But maybe that's something I can do as well. Try establish something there as well. Because, with all the attention that I'm putting into the quads, maybe the deficits is maybe another little angle where I can, put some points into that. Because let's say it this way. If I PR on the deficit, will I PR off the floor? I want to say yes. But the same thing, I'm thinking the same thing off the rack. If I do a mid-shin rack pull and I PR there, I also feel like I will PR off the floor. So which one is more important? Which one is the solution for me? If the best I can do is off the floor out of the three numbers. It's not really declaring itself either way, is it? Deficit or rack, because they're both weaker than the floor pull. God, man. I love thinking about this stuff, but, it's sometimes there's no solution until you try it. And, I have tried all of these things in the past, but at different times and at different fitness levels and at different, periods where I focus on different things. Makes me ponder. Appreciate you guys. I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.